You're listening to the Utah Checkdown Podcast. And now your host, Josh Furlong.
Welcome back to another edition of the Utah Checkdown Podcast. I am Josh Furlong. Happy to be back with you once again today. It's a little rainy here in Utah, so nice and cool. Not too bad. It's always a good day to have that. So happy to be back and talking some fun topics today. I also have a special guest that I think Utah fans will be happy about. So we'll see. They hated him at first, right? No, I'm just kidding. Let me first get into our sponsor. Every possibility begins with a spark, and possibility can grow into something even better than expected. With a clear view of what matters most, your possibilities are endless. From its first flicker at the University of Utah, UFirst Credit Union has grown to meet its potential and ignites your possibilities. They've grown into Canyon View Credit Union. Same roots, new path. Welcome to Canyon View Credit Union. Check out the full details at canyonviewcu.com. All right, like I said, we're going to just jump right into this. We're going to welcome our special guest. You may know him. His name is Josh Newman. Josh Newman, how have you been?
I'm hanging in there, Josh. Really appreciate you having me on. When you texted me asking me to come on, that was exciting. Of course, I enjoyed doing this podcast with you when we were doing it during the 23 season. I left the area, but I'm excited to be here. I'm happy to be here.
As I said, man, people didn't give you a warm welcome when you first got to Utah, right? But then now it's been like, since you've left, people are like drastically wishing you were back. They like your voice. They like how open and honest you were. You weren't trying to prop up everybody and trying to do it. You just were a straight shooter. You are a straight shooter. And so I think that's been missed. So you're missed now. How about that?
We'll go with that. When I first showed up here, I think my New York, New Jersey-ness was a little too profound, for the people, and we all sort of had to settle in a little bit. But I think everybody settled in, and we had a good time when I was there.
Any good bagel places down there in Austin?
That's funny. There are a couple that we've sort of veered towards. It's a little bit better than Salt Lake City. It's not markedly better. I will say we were my wife and my son and I were in New York for a week in late January just for vacation after football ended, and we absolutely had to figure out suitcase space because we brought back like 24 bagels for the freezer. So that alone should tell you what the bagel situation is here in Central Texas.
Hey, but you have amazing barbecue, so
ridiculous barbecue, dude. Ridiculous barbecue.
Got to go to Terry Black's.
Yes.
All right. Well, obviously the last year you've been the beat writer for the University of Texas. You had a great season in terms of being able to watch a lot of success. It was their first year in the SEC, moved from the Big 12 to the SEC. And I think early on a lot of people expected them to struggle just because it's the SEC. And I think Texas obviously was better built to be able to handle that than they were when they were expected to move over there when the announcement came. But you get to the playoffs, you get to see a bunch of different things. I mean, just real briefly, I mean, what was that experience like just to be able to kind of cover that and kind of see college football at kind of its peak?
Yeah, it was an interesting season here at Texas, to say the least. I didn't show up. I showed up here late in the 23 season, so I covered. Let me think. I covered the Big 12 title game in 23, and they made the 14 playoff. I covered the semi at the Sugar Bowl, and then I didn't know anything. I didn't know anybody, and then you sort of like settle into the off season, and you're trying to view things, engage things, and build relationships. And it was pretty clear last off season that like the expectation, the general expectation here, the mandate is championships. Mm-hmm. Like if you're not winning championships and getting rings, it's a bit of a disappointment. And you sort of looked at what they had coming back, right? Like the timeline on Quinn Ewers had sort of changed, right? He was this, epic sort of high school recruit that was expected to stay in college for 3 years and leave for the NFL. But he's had some injury stuff and was not great in 23 as a redshirt sophomore. So he decides to come back. A lot of guys off the 23 team left for the draft. So they hit the portal, and they hit the portal, really well. And they restocked. and you're sort of looking at the team and you're looking at the schedule, and the schedule on paper last year was probably pretty conducive to like being good in the SEC, like pretty immediately. Like you didn't have to play Tennessee, you didn't have to play Alabama. You missed a lot of like the heavyweight type of programs. Didn't have to play LSU. So we get out there and they win at Michigan early when we thought that Michigan was good, right? They were ranked number 9, I think, in early September when Texas went out there. They bludgeoned them. They win, the Red River rivalry against Oklahoma, which is a big deal here, huge deal here. The only time they really got beat up in the regular season is they got beat up by Georgia here in Austin. They were down 23-0 pretty immediately, lost that game, but they kept on chugging, and yours was hurt, and we saw Arch Manning, for a couple of games, and yours came back, and it was pretty clear that he was not 100% at all, but healthy enough to play, if that makes sense. Not fully healthy, but healthy enough to play. And they sort of tailored the play calling to what he could do. A lot of line of scrimmage stuff, behind the line of scrimmage, right, to a wide out, make the first guy miss, get up the field. So, it was interesting, right? They finish 11-1. They somehow lose the SEC championship game to Georgia, just completely dominated Georgia that day and lost. Make the playoff, beat Clemson here in a first round game. They win this epic CFP quarterfinal against Arizona State at the Peach Bowl. They needed a
fun game.
4th and 13. Crazy game. They needed a 4th and 13 touchdown in overtime to keep it alive. And then they sort of, I wouldn't say they cough up a semi against Ohio State, but they certainly had their opportunities and didn't cash in. So, 13-3 season, first year in the SEC, right? You get to the SEC title game. You didn't win anything last season, but you went 13-3, and you were a handful of plays away from getting to the national title game. So very interesting season here. Getting the lay of the land in the SEC, like the big difference. And I was thinking about this as I was going through some stuff, getting ready to come on here and talk to you. I think the big difference between like covering Texas and covering Utah, just from a media standpoint, is like here, it's every day. Every day, no matter what time of year. There's always recruiting. There's always portal stuff. There's always the next wave of like 20, 26 kids, 20, 27 kids every single day here. And I remember, covering Utah when Nate Johnson was still in high school in Clovis. I remember talking to his high school coach. Nate had committed, and I was doing a profile, and I was talking to his high school coach at Clovis, and his high school coach, who had dealt with Kyle McDonald, right, and Sharif Shah for years, right? They recruited the Central Valley, forever. And, to paraphrase the high school coach, his high school coach was basically, look, Utah's a good place for kids to go to because it's not a pressure cooker. And he called it like a Thursday to Sunday program. Like the build up to the game starts Thursday, Friday, Saturday's the game, Sunday's the sort of fallout. And then you take a little bit of a rest or like take a breath Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And I thought that was pretty smart. That's not the case here covering Texas. It is every single day there is interest in Texas football.
I love it. I think it's great. And I want to get more of the SEC's perspective in a second and kind of how that compares with Utah. But I want to jump right into a topic that has been pretty heated lately this week. Obviously, let me kind of set the stage. Obviously, the transfer portal is open, the spring transfer portal, 10-day window. It opened last Tuesday, if I'm not mistaken, and it closes tomorrow. So Friday it closes. As I've reminded people on the podcast, the portal closes on Friday, but that doesn't mean announcements couldn't come a couple days after. They have 48 hours to be able to do that. So you're in the home stretch, essentially, is there. So what has happened is, Utah has one player, their star wide receiver. He was expected to be wide receiver 1. Only had a few catches in games last year, so he didn't have much production, but he was a freshman. So you get that. And he enters the transfer portal, and suddenly, Utah's worried. That one hurts because I think that caused people some surprise. But then there came a lot of rumors, and we love rumors in transfer portal season. Who doesn't love that? That, Utah's favorite opponent, BYU, has been trying to destabilize a lot of what Utah is doing. And so what they've been doing is throwing a bunch of cash towards some of these players who are not in the portal. You've got the rumored players were Dallas Vakalahi, Caleb Lomu, Smith Snowden. Smith Snowden was obviously a big topic last transfer portal, trying to get him. And that, it is what it is. That's what they're trying to do. The latest rumor, and I've had some confirmation, but it's been kind of fuzzy on what this number is that Smith Snowden has been offered $1.9 million to go to BYU, which is asinine, quite honestly. I mean, that's a crazy number for college for a nickel. I mean, he can play corner, obviously, but guys in the NFL are making that kind of money. Like that's what it is. So it's a crazy number. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk about trying to just get kind of some wins over Utah and doing all that. So there's a couple things that I want to tackle here. One, you've got the tampering side. None of these guys are in the portal. And so there's a lot of conversation about how are these guys getting talked to? Is this an okay thing to do? And then second, we can talk about some transfer portal stuff. So with that as kind of the context, I have kind of a different take on the tampering than maybe some other people here in this market. I know a lot of people are frustrated by it. I let my opinion known on Twitter, and kind of it was a safe opinion. It wasn't quite such a hot take, right? But it was my opinion on what things go. But I guess, what is your general opinion on tampering in the college football era that we're in right now, while also using that as kind of a Texas background, knowing that Texas is the big dog, right? Whatever Texas wants, they're going to generally get. And so you've kind of got a different perspective of a team that had, unlimited amounts of money, whether that be oil money or whatever that may be, but also knowing that this is kind of the current era of tampering. So it's pretty broad-based right there that I'm giving you.
Yeah, I mean, tampering in college athletics, specifically college football, has been going on forever.
No way. Don't.
Forever. I mean, I'm not following Utah on a day-to-day basis anymore, but I still follow enough Twitter accounts where I've sort of got the temperature of what's going on with this situation. Tampering's been going on forever. All right. This is not some new phenomenon. Okay. And, money under the table, bag men on a coaching staff, enticing a kid with houses or money or cars. This has been going on forever. So this is not some new phenomenon in college football. And it is certainly not some new phenomenon in the Mountain Time Zone. This, maybe it's a little bit different with the dynamic at BYU and how that school operates. Maybe it's not hasn't been to that extent, and just at Texas, look, Texas is not immune to having their guys poached either, right? Like the CFP semis end, and you started hearing rumors of bags being thrown at, Arch Manning, and bags being thrown at Colin Simmons, who was a freshman All-American edge rusher, who's, the next great edge rusher at Texas. He'll be in the NFL in 2 years. Big bags being thrown at Anthony Hill Jr., right? Their middle linebacker, who's going to be an NFL kid in 2 years. So Texas is not immune to these things. But as you said, I mean, they, essentially have enough resources where they can stave off pretty much anybody, right? They're going to get who they want. They're going to retain who they want. And, Utah's a bit of a different situation. I see all this stuff on social media, and I think people need to relax a little bit. This is the way that business is done. It's been this way for a long time. Maybe it hasn't been this way at Utah and BYU, for all these years, but this is what it is now. And I think the notion that, BYU wants to essentially destabilize Utah, I think that's a little overblown. I think that's a bit of a rivalry thing that is a little overblown. Of course, people are going to get upset because the program that is trying to poach their guys is the blood rival, is the arch rival. So, inherently people are going to be upset, but this is the cost of doing business now. And if your checkbook, and I think I said this on Twitter to your tweet, if your resources and your checkbook and your culture are not in order and in line, you leave yourself vulnerable to having guys poached. 1.9 million, 2 million, $2 million for a nickel is not a number that, that I've heard here in SEC country. That's just not the going rate. I mean, you might have too much money if you're trying to, pay Smith Snowden $2 million of it. But this is the cost of doing business, guys.
Yeah.
This is the way that it goes. And, again, I'm empathetic towards the rivalry, and people are going to be upset because it's BYU. I don't think people were this upset when Alabama, can we talk about this Alabama Dalton Kincaid thing now, has enough time passed where we can,
that was only $1 million
talk about it
though, Josh.
Yeah, that was only $1 million. I don't think people were that upset, versus this. So settle in, guys. This is what it is now. The teams with money and the programs with money and the programs with needs, like a BYU who's got a apparently a lot of money to spend, this is what it is. You're going to at least have your players attempt to be poached. Might not work every time, but $2 million is not a number that I would turn down personally.
Yeah, no, I mean, like I said, like NFL guys, I think Clark Phillips, I looked up his contract, and he's not even making $2 million a year. So, I mean, that goes to show kind of the level of pay that those guys have. Now, granted, he's still a rookie contract, that kind of stuff, but the fact that $2 million is being thrown, loyalties, they can go only so far, right? Especially if there's no guarantee that you're going to see the league. Now, I would argue that Smith Snowden probably has a bright future in the league, and we'll see. But I think the challenge here has always been, okay, tampering is bad, right? Obviously, you see in the NFL that tampering is not allowed. They have rules and situations where if a team tampers, not in their legal tampering time, there is consequences, whether that be losing draft picks. You also receive a fine. But I would say that there's a massive difference in how the NFL operates than what college does. One, there's a collective bargaining agreement. There's a certain level of standard at play there. There's a lot here. But at the same time, there's nothing to guarantee somebody not talking to me right now and trying to quote unquote tamper me to get me to go somewhere else. Now, granted, it's not a 1-to-1 ratio, right? Like, it's not like we have a transfer portal that I put myself in and say, hey, somebody come snatch me up for a new job. So, like, it's not completely the same as that, but it's the same thing as the real world, right? Where if there is somebody that you're attracting and you are attracted to and you want to be able to get him, you're going to try everything you can. And a lot of these coaches have relationships with these guys from a long time in the recruiting process. You think that coaches just stop talking to these players after they've committed to a school? No. Especially in the transfer portal era, these guys are keeping touch and they're making that contact to make sure that they have a connection. And so as much as everybody wants to stop tampering in the collegiate realm, it's just not a feasible possibility unless drastic changes happen. Now, granted, the NCAA could have done things a long time ago to make these types of things happen, but for so long they were just living on the backs of amateurism that they didn't have to worry about this. And then by the time it changed, they were completely behind, and they're losing at a record pace of all these things. So as frustrating as it is, and it is frustrating, right? Like I sit here, and as a reporter, it's hard to kind of, you say that there's an off season, right? Especially here at Utah. You talked about Texas. There's never really an off season, but here in Utah, I think fans, they kind of check out to some extent after football is there. There's the diehards. They're always going to be engaged, but it's very far between. And so it's tough for these guys to feel like that there's another transfer portal coming, or there's another thing happening where, this last year especially, there was a lot of guys that entered the portal that had committed to Utah, and then suddenly they got a bag somewhere else and they left. And that's a tough look. So I get it. It's frustrating. You want to be able to cheer for Utah while at the same time cheering for these players. I think that's what makes college even better than maybe the pros at sometimes, is that you buy into these connections, the grassroots kind of building of a player, and that makes it tough. So I guess in that era, how would you approach, or how would you tell fans, not that we should tell fans how to fan, but I think, how would you tell fans to kind of approach this era knowing that it's not going to get any easier? If anything, it's going to only grow, and unless the NCAA changes some stuff, this is the new era of college football.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know what to tell fans at this point, especially the sort of fan that is an alum and went to school there and has a deep connection and has season tickets. Like, I don't know what to tell that fan, because these are drastic changes.
Mm-hmm.
As recently as what are we in? 25, like even just like back to like COVID-ish, right? Like 1920, you would have a season end, and you could look at the roster and you could take a reasonable guess at who was coming back and who might be leaving. It was not rampant transfer portal stuff. Sure, the transfer portal was there 5 years ago, but it was not rampant transferring and NIL and pay for play. That's what this is. It's pay for play, and it's only going to get worse, as you said. So what do you tell the college fan? In the professional ranks, the term, like, you're just rooting for laundry,
Yeah.
right? Because it's free agency and trades and those types of things happen. You really, and it's not going to be a quick process, but I think I think Joe Average Fan is going to have to, like, slowly but surely sort of like take this as you're watching professional sports. You are essentially watching professional sports, and you need to start rooting for the laundry, because the days of, you know, guys staying 3 years, 4 years, that's like ending, right? The fact that Quinn Ewers stayed at Texas for 3 years and he was a third year incumbent starter this past season, that's like a unicorn at this point. That's just like not happening almost anywhere anymore, especially at the Power Five level. So again, this is all sort of drastic and it's all sort of fast and things are moving quickly, but you're really going to have to just like, I don't want to say get over it, but like you're essentially watching professional sports and you need to start treating it as professional sports. And I know that's hard, again, when you are so engaged. And if somebody, grew up in Salt Lake City or grew up watching Utah football or went to Utah and, watched Rising and these Kyle Whittingham teams and the Pac-12 title games, and you are invested, you're going to have to sort of like divorce yourself a little bit from what it used to be, because what it used to be is gone and it's not coming back.
Well, and as part of this, speaking specifically to Utah, Kyle Whittingham has always had this weird relationship with BYU. Obviously, that's his alma mater. He doesn't like to say the name BYU ever. He will always say the team down south or our in-state rival, whatever that may be. So there's this level of pettiness there where he clearly doesn't want to be able to put his name in his mouth, right? But at the same time, he's very deferential to BYU and Kalani Sitake. They're good friends. He doesn't want to do anything to hurt him. But I will say he is not helping himself in the sense that he's not willing to go on the attack. And I would say that if this is true, if all these things about BYU are true, and look, you can say, I'm not trying to point fingers at BYU because every single school does this. Don't pretend like Utah doesn't. They gutted New Mexico when they got a new offensive coordinator, new players. They've gutted other programs. They're not immune to this, right? And
that gets very lost. I don't mean to cut you off.
No,
what you just said, that factor gets very pushed aside by Utah fans. Like Utah's doing this stuff too.
Oh yeah.
Utah took New Mexico's OC and the OC brought the QB. That kid's going to start, right? There's no doubt that kid's
for
the
sure.
starter.
Yes.
So what are we doing here? Like Utah fans either really get past that too. Continue.
But for sure. I mean, it's like as much as Dampier went into the transfer portal, you can't tell me that when Beck went into Utah to coach as the offensive coordinator that there wasn't some conversations had. No, you got to be kidding me. But I guess the point that I'm trying to make here is if this is true, let's assume, we're just going to say for the sake of this argument, that BYU is doing everything they can to destabilize Utah, which quite honestly I think is a terrible strategy if that's your only goal, because your goal is to win games, and destabilizing Utah is a secondary thing, but you're trying to get as many best players as possible. And if you can't tell me that Smith Snowden's not one of the best players possible to try to get, you're crazy. So, take that for what it's worth. But if this is really the reality, Utah has to go on the attack. They have to be better at their tampering game. They have to be better at their transfer portal game. They have to do all these things. That's just the nature of this era. And if you can't live in that era, it's not going to work out for you. And I think that's the hard part with somebody like a Kyle Whittingham, who he wants to embrace NIL, and he's actually done a really good job of kind of mending to kind of the current era. But I guarantee you he doesn't like this era. And he wants to be able to just ignore it to some extent. And so it's easy to kind of say, you know what, like I'm going to wash my hands of that. But in this current era of college football, you can't wash your hands of that. You have to be knee deep in it. And I know Kalani Sitake hates NIL as well. Like, I understand that. Most coaches do. They don't want to have to work 24/7 for every single day of the year. As much as like the NFL gets days off, the college doesn't get that. And you can put a GM in, you can have all these things, but you're still the top guy. And that makes it tough. So at the end of the day, you have to play the game better. And if you really truly believe that Utah is the top dog in the state, which they do, they believe that Utah is the top dog in the state, you have to act like it. And I understand you may not have the same boosters that BYU has or any of these other programs to fend them off, but you've got to find ways to be able to kind of keep the fences up and not allow that kind of stuff to happen. And if you don't do that, you're going to always be in this situation. And it's really, I don't want to say you have nobody but to blame but yourself, but at the same time, you kind of do. You've got to find ways to be able to play this game and do it effectively.
Two questions. I don't know if this is public or if you can even say this out loud, but do we know what Utah football's NIL budget is? Ballpark.
So there's questions on kind of what it's going to be combined with the rev share. My understanding is it's going to be closer to 15 million with the rev share, based on how that
With
goes
the rev share?
with the rev share. That's not a huge number, quite honestly. And I
No, it's
think
not.
my understanding is last year it was probably closer to 6 to 8 million, which is not as great, right? And so
No.
Kyle has always talked about needing more. Every coach is going to do that, so it's not crazy. But he's talked about them also using kind of an NFL style model of positions and how they like rate things, and so like
Yeah.
they're going to stick to that. And like the fact that you can do that, that helps. But at the same time, if you don't have more money, it doesn't work. For example, BYU, and I don't follow BYU religiously, so it's hard to know fully if this is accurate. But based on
Sure.
what I've heard, is BYU has had a similar system, but they also have certain positions or certain players that if they need that, they will go to the donors, as you would expect, and say, we need more money for X player. Utah has had that with a Cam Rising, and Cam Rising has taken a majority of that NIL budget in the past, but like it hasn't been that same ratio of, hey, Spencer Fano is, getting a ton of attention because he's one of the top right tackles in all of the country. We need more. There's some of that, but I would say it's much less than what BYU has done.
Yeah. So I was going to ask about the budget because I remember reading that and you touched on that. And I remember Kyle at one point when I was still there, he was talking about NIL in the future and like he likened it to the top 25 teams are going to be the top 25 biggest
Mm-hmm.
NIL budgets. And he was this was what, like 22, I
Yes.
think. And he was sort of tongue in cheek at the time, but like he in
gets it.
hindsight, he saw what was coming. And now it's here, and it's gonna be interesting. Like, look, just in the Big 12, I'm in the state of Texas, right? Like, Texas Tech
They found
is sparing
gangbusters.
no expense,
No.
no expense, dude. Like facilities, they have a brand new football facility. It's gorgeous. The roster, and I'm not even talking about like just football.
Mm-hmm.
There was a softball pitcher, the best in the country. She was in the transfer portal. Somebody came up with a gigantic bag for her. JT Toppin, right, their star forward on the basketball team. Texas would not pony up the money for him. Last offseason, Texas Tech came. He was going to go to the NBA. Texas Tech came with a bigger bag. This also, either adapt or die.
Yeah.
Catch up or die. Like you want to win the Big 12. You want to qualify for a 12-team football playoff. Adapt or die. Like that's what you're looking at if you're Utah right now.
No, and I completely agree, and I think that's the tough part that Utah's been in is they haven't had the donor base that even like BYU has had recently, right? Obviously, there's some interest to be able to make BYU a better program. There's interest to make Utah a better program, but for whatever reason, and there's a lot of factors that go into this, and we don't have time to talk about all of them, Utah hasn't been able to successfully get it to the level that they want it to be at. Now, that's not to say that they haven't been competitive and they're still not good. The reality is there's every single program in the country outside of a select few are dealing with this same thing. So not everybody is Texas Tech. Not everybody's Ohio State or Texas or, Georgia or Alabama. Like those teams are obviously going to have that, and they've got a great founding support and all that other stuff. But most teams, I would say, even in Power 4, are struggling with that. There's going to be a lot of high donors for some of these programs, but it's still a challenge. And so, like, this is the current era of it, and it barring the NCAA and these conferences agreeing to some sort of collective bargaining agreement or making these guys employees or something that way, not much is going to change. And it's always going to be based on the donor stuff. And you can argue that with this new NCAA settlement that may or may not pass here soon, I would assume it still does based on the updates, whether they grandfather them in or not.
Yeah.
There's still going to be situations here where, yes, there's a clearinghouse, so to speak, about these NIL deals. But let's be honest, like it's not going to work the same way that everybody thinks there is. There's not going to, there's going to be under the table deals that are being done.
No doubt.
And they're going to be more legal than what they were in the past. And so there's a lot of ways that you can skirt the laws because you can't prohibit fair trade, right? You can't do these things where you can say, hey, you can't stop somebody from making a certain amount of money just because of whatever you want to put in there, just because you're part of an organization. At the end of the day, the NCAA has no legal bounds to enforce this stuff.
Never has.
It
No.
hasn't. It's all an agreement based on all of these schools. And so if the schools don't agree to it or they don't want to enforce it, there's nothing there. Now, with that said, kind of kind of a tangent, but staying with it, you do have this Nico Iamalava drama with the Madden, his brother, leaving
Right.
Maryland to come to UCLA. Now there are certain situations where maybe the schools can kind of recoup some of this, or the NIL collectives, or whatever we want to call them, can collect buyout money as part of that. Are you in favor of schools doing that? Do you think this should be the strategy, or is this just kind of a Band-Aid to something that's a bigger issue?
Well, that's sort of two different things. I mean, yes, it feels like a Band-Aid to a bigger issue. Just in general, just not even college football. You or I or any Joe average citizen, you sign a contract, you are held to the terms of that contract.
Mm-hmm.
You go buy a car, you're getting financing from the bank, you have to pay the note every month, or they take the car,
Yeah.
right? Like you're held to the terms of the contract. I'll be curious to see how that plays out moving forward. But like, yes, I think it's a good idea that that these student athletes are held to the terms of a contract. Now, again, this is all sort of evolving, right? It's not in its final form yet. Learning and figuring it out and evolving. Do you start putting buyout clauses in these contracts? There was a mid-major basketball coach, a couple of days ago who floated the idea of, like some sort of buyout situation. Like if mid-major A signs this kid for X number of years and he leaves before the contract is up, that's fine. But there needs to be some sort of, buyout clause
Mm-hmm.
so that they're not completely left, with nothing. The situation at Tennessee, the thing that I've been thinking about is, that's fine, right? Tennessee and Josh Heupel, they're, nobody's bigger than the program, right? Like Nico wasn't doing the right thing and he left and they're letting him leave and they wouldn't match the number, and that's fine. Let's see how fine it is when Tennessee is 7-5 and not going to the college football playoff. We'll see how fine it is then for Josh Heupel, because their quarterback situation, they even swapped, right? Joey Aguilar, who went from App State to UCLA. Nico goes to UCLA. Joey Aguilar goes to the portal, commits to Tennessee. It was an even trade. The problem with bringing in a quarterback in April is that you don't have a very long runway to get the playbook, get in the locker room, become the leader that a quarterback has to be. And oh, by the way, you're playing an SEC schedule.
Yeah.
So let's see how okay it is in October when Tennessee has 3 losses and the season is essentially over. That's the part of it that nobody is really talking about enough. It's like, okay, you feel like you did the right thing for the program. Let's see how okay it is when you don't have a viable quarterback.
And I think this one's going to be more interesting for Utah fans simply because UCLA is Utah's first opponent of the season. So they do.
Will Rising be ready? Sorry. Had to.
Honestly, it's my favorite joke. I keep telling everybody, I said, little did we know that he would be ready for this UCLA game.
So good. So good. Anyway.
No, but I think this one's going to be interesting, right? And I think there are going to be certain things that schools or collectives do to try to, recoup some of the money to make them feel good, right? And I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. I think if you renege on a contract or do whatever it is, yeah, there's going to be consequences, like you mentioned. So really fascinated to kind of see the evolution of this. I think the problem with all of this right now is it's evolving in live form, right? Like there's no way to kind of step back and say, hey, let's do it this way. The NCAA had an opportunity to do this long time ago, and they punted on it, right? They wanted to live on the backs of amateurism and pretend like everybody was going to be fine with that. Now we're in a situation where, what college football looks like even in 5 years is going to be drastically different than what it is today, right? And I think eventually, I know everybody's saying, oh, college football is dying. I don't think college football is dying. The only way that it will die is if this kind of stuff gets people so fired up that they just stop watching, right? It turns the diehard fans into casual fans, and by casual fans into nothing, right? And there is a potential for that. But I would say it's not going that way based on the ratings that we saw last year.
Yes.
This isn't a dying sport. And so as frustrating as this is, everybody's going to be frustrated by these 2 transfer portal seasons. And, you can argue whether there should be 1, whatever that may be. I don't really care about that right now. At the end of the day, in August, when the ball kicks off, everybody forgets that. And suddenly you're back to college football and you're watching it and you're fully embracing the guys that are on your roster and everything is better, right? There's still a lot of problems. Don't get me wrong. There's going to be a lot of problems and there's going to be a lot of evolution in this. But at the end of the day, when Utah kicks off on August 30th in the Rose Bowl, a place that they've obviously had a lot of fun, it's not going to matter, right?
No.
And you're going to rally around whomever is on the roster and everything's going to be okay. So
this is what the offseason is.
It is.
You know, the offseason is for complaining and problems. Part of it is, I mean, I think everybody's bored.
Yeah.
Everybody wants football, and there's no football. But you want to talk about football, and so, like, this is what's happening. You know, the tampering situation, and, you know, it's been an interesting week on social media.
Yes.
For sure.
I'm trying to stay off it as much as possible. I want to stick with football for a little bit, but I can't ignore that since I have you on, you have to talk about Alex Jensen.
Oh my God.
You fought off people for a long time about Alex Jensen, not because you didn't think he was a good fit, but he wasn't the fit at that time. But now Utah has Alex Jensen. I'm not expecting you to know everything about what's going on here, but just your general thoughts on the Alex Jensen era now at Utah.
Yeah, no. And we've gotten a lot of mileage out of these jokes also.
Yes.
No. In excuse me, in 2021, when Larry Krystkowiak was fired, everybody was sort of, well, not everybody, a lot of people were clamoring for Alex Jensen, who was an NBA assistant, who has been an NBA assistant for a lot of years. People were clamoring for Johnny Bryant, who, famously was, Donovan Mitchell's guy and with the Jazz and rose up the ranks. And he was eventually the associate head coach of the Knicks. That was a very different time in college basketball. At the time, I thought that was a terrible idea. Clamoring for, well, first of all, I mean, you're clamoring for the glory days of, Rick Majerus in 97 and 98, which I always think is silly.
It's dangerous, honestly, quite honestly.
It's what?
I think it's dangerous, honestly, to try to pin that on somebody and try to force that on someone.
Just, in certain, quote, members of the media in Salt Lake City were sort of like stoking those flames. It was a very bad idea. Speed ahead to now, and the environment and the ecosystem of college basketball and how programs are run and how programs are constructed has drastically changed now. So, Craig Smith fired with however many games to go, and even me, who's not paying attention and is sort of like watching this from afar, you could sort of see where this was going. Hiring an NBA assistant now, not even talking about Alex Jensen specifically, but hiring an NBA assistant now and bringing on another NBA person to be your general manager and to help run your program makes more sense now in this current ecosystem. You want to hire Alex Jensen. He's an accomplished NBA guy, NBA assistant for a long time. That part is fine. The part of trying to grasp onto the glory days of a generation ago and thinking that he is just going to walk in and snap his fingers and boom, that's still not great. There are certainly, plenty of Utah fans that is their thinking, right? That, MVP of the West Regional, right? They go to the Final Four, the whole thing, and they think that he's going to roll in there and it's going to be fine. The problem with that is, you still play in the Big 12.
Yeah.
So maybe you're not going to like own the Big 12 immediately. Hiring Rafael Chilius immediately was a smart, savvy, veteran move by Alex Jensen. He's been a college assistant for a number of years at some very high profile programs. So to bring him in as your number one on the bench, again, smart, savvy move. That was good. I'm forgetting who we brought in as his GM, but it's another NBA guy.
Wes Wilcox.
Thank you. That was another sort of, he's like in tune with, the times and like what you need to run a program. You start seeing, or you start looking at who they've pulled out of the portal since his arrival. I think it's pretty clear that Utah under Alex Jensen wants to be more athletic and wants to get up and down a lot more than Craig Smith's teams were doing. Again, that's what the game is, that's where the game is going. Of course, trying to build a roster out of the portal, you have to really be cognizant of the pieces and will they fit together, and you're trying to figure it out on the fly. I don't think he did himself any favors, Alex Jensen, by finishing out the year in Dallas, but that was his prerogative. I think you put yourself behind the eight ball just a little bit by making that decision. But it's going to be interesting. It's not the worst idea in the world anymore to hire an MBA assistant to run your college program. And it's I wouldn't say it's in vogue right now, but it's certainly more in vogue than it was the last time Utah needed a basketball coach. And we'll see. I think we can both agree that Craig Smith did not have all of the NIL resources at his disposal that he needed. I don't care what is said to anybody at the Salt Lake Tribune. I don't care what is on the record. I think, let's get real here. He did not have all the resources that he needed. Some of that's on him. Some of it's not. So if Alex Jensen has all the resources that he needs in this current landscape, there is reason that Utah fans should be, reasonably optimistic with this hire.
Yeah, I don't think hiring him the last time would have gone well. I think they would have set him up for failure just simply based on the NIL situation. Utah didn't
different world.
Oh yeah, they didn't understand really what the NIL world was going to be then. And so it's different, right? And I think if he has a chance to succeed, this can be the right era. My caution is always just don't try to pin the 97, 98 type years on him as if that's going to be it, right? You're setting yourself up for failure. You're making him a guy that always has to defer to Rick Majerus. But I think he's handling it in the right way. Just based on the intro press conference, is he talked about he's embracing the NBA roots, right? He could easily have said, I'm going to embrace Rick Majerus. We're going to do it this way. But he embraced the NBA roots, which I think is smart. He's paying homage to Majerus, his coach, but recognizing this is the current era of college basketball.
Yeah. Yes.
All right. We don't need to get more into that. So with the last little bit of this podcast, I kind of want to compare Utah to a team in the SEC. Obviously, you covering a team in the SEC, and your background is still fairly limited because this is their first season, but I think you probably got a very good taste of what it is to be in the SEC. You also covered Utah at, you could say, its peak. Obviously, you get 2 Rose Bowl opportunities. Things were going well, Pac-12 championships. You could argue that things could have been better, but I'd say this is relatively near the peak of what Utah's been. So it's no surprise that Utah has grander, destinations that they have in mind. They want to be in the Big Ten. They want to be included in whatever the Power 2 conference looks like in the future, assuming that that's the direction this goes. You have a university president that is building a university to try to fit that type of model, very visionary in terms of trying to get there, right? And so I think Utah is doing everything they can to lay the groundwork, but that doesn't guarantee a spot, right? And we understand that. Obviously, the sports have to be successful. You have to have a lot of things, whether that be donor bases, be successful. And so there's a lot that's going into the university to try to transform it into what it hopes to be as a Power 2 program. So with that as kind of the context of that, how would you kind of compare where these two programs are right now, knowing that Texas is a blue blood, right? Like, we understand that Texas has been, one of the best teams in all of college football in totality, right? Obviously, they had a ton of lulls there, and the best joke was, is Texas back yet? Those were always fun. Texas is definitely back now, and Sarkisian is a phenomenal coach for that program. But where would you kind of compare where these two programs are right now, knowing that there's a lot?
Yeah. Boy, that's loaded.
Yeah.
Texas
Good luck.
Texas has itself, not just specifically football, but that entire athletic department has itself lined up exceptionally well for the long term.
Mm.
You're in the SEC, you are in a Power 2 conference, you are number 1 in the country in terms of athletic department net revenue. I don't have the number in front of me. They brought in, $270 something million in revenue the last fiscal year. So as a department, right, you have this athletic director, Chris Del Conte, who is like, I don't even know how to describe this guy. It's sort of like this bulldog, not win at all cost mentality, but he understands the the needs of Texas and what Texas fans want and what the donor base wants. And he is pushing all the right buttons in terms of decision making and personnel, coaching hires. Everything seems to be working out. And then you talk about football specifically. Steve Sarkisian comes in. They go to the college football playoff in 2023 when it was 4 teams. They enter the SEC. They go to the college football playoff again when it was 12 teams. This past season, recruiting is going exceptionally well, and the transfer portal and the depth everywhere. You've got this generational, people think anyway, this generational quarterback in Arch Manning who's going to step in and be the guy finally in 2025. So the long-term prognosis all over the place is excellent. Football, men's basketball just hired Sean Miller. He's been hitting the portal. The baseball team is number 1 in the country. The softball team is just up and down the list of things going on in Texas. They are lined up exceptionally well for the long term in any factor that you can come up with. Utah, nobody's going to be Texas, but no, for sure. As you said, right, like Utah wants to get itself to the point where they are a power 2 sort of institution. And when the next round of realignment, because we're going to do this again, right? Once the media rights deals have 2 or 2.5 years left, like we're going to start scrambling again, and what does that look like? And I remember when Oregon and Washington and USC and UCLA left for the Big Ten, that I wrote about, we're going to do this again, towards the end of the decade. What does that look like? And I still think that Utah has, enough at its disposal where you cannot completely discount them in a vacuum, of course, potentially ending up in a super expanded Big Ten. As you said, I completely agree. Taylor Randall is sort of this, strong leader, visionary figure, wants to turn the campus into something that it's not right now. And of course, that's a years long process, and they're going to have to raise money and maybe bond some of that money to get some things built. The TV market in Salt Lake City and in that part of the country is probably viable enough where we can have this conversation, right? We're not in like El Paso, Texas or something. No disrespect to El Paso, Texas. But I think there's a long road to go for Utah, but I think there's enough factors there and enough of the right people in the decision-making process at Utah and enough, visionary thinking. Again, I know that, Taylor Randall has this grand plan, of campus transformation, includes the Huntsman Center, et cetera. There's enough factors at Utah where you cannot completely discount Utah as a factor, as a P2 factor. The next time we're doing media rights, and if there is, realignment and things of that nature.
And I know you're not an expert on this, and so I'm just more kind of getting your thoughts on this. But these conference realignments have shifted in kind of how they've looked at stuff, right? For example, years ago it was always about the TV markets, kind of what was there in the Pac-12. They wanted like-minded institutions. The AAU membership was definitely important. You could argue the Big Ten is kind of close to that. They've loosened it a little bit. But in your mind, if Utah were to try to get into the Power 2 conference, we're assuming that that's headed that way, is winning enough? Is it just simply based on winning, or do you feel like Utah has to do more as an institution, whether that be the athletic department or as, academics in general? How do you think that comes about? Do you think winning is enough in broad base of their numbers, football, basketball, whatever that may be, or where do you kind of see that?
Excuse me. No, winning is not enough, because winning in general it can be fleeting. Michigan had plenty of lean years before Harbaugh, and they won the national title a couple of years ago. You can go up and down the list on SEC teams. I mean, some of these SEC teams have been historically bad in football. And if you were to institute like a relegation system, like in European soccer, like Vanderbilt would never get back into the SEC, like ever. And Mississippi State would be out of the SEC, in perpetuity. So yes, winning helps, and winning leads to better TV numbers and better enrollment numbers and all these things, but it has to be more. And yeah, the AAU stuff was, sort of prevalent, years ago. I think that's still a factor, but it has to be more than winning. Just talking to, SEC people like last year at SEC spring meetings, right? Like talking to presidents and talking to athletic directors. It's like there's no obvious next candidate for the SEC. Like talking on the record, off the record. I mean, of course, these things are fluid and ever changing, but like there's no obvious next school in terms of athletic achievement, academics, part of the country. I mean, a running joke here has been like, the Southeastern Conference. Why are Texas and Oklahoma members of the Southeastern Conference, right? So geography doesn't matter as much as it did before, but it is a factor still. I think that is one thing that is working against Utah is that you're sort of in this, desert, no pun intended, that it doesn't make much sense geographically to wind up in the Big Ten or the SEC. Again, not that matters like it used to, right? We see the 4 West Coast schools in the Big Ten, but that's it's going to be interesting. I really think there's an argument for Utah. There's an argument for a lot of Big 12 schools. There's an argument for BYU to end up in the Big Ten potentially, but nothing really totally makes sense anymore. And whatever you and I are discussing now, whatever we think about this topic now, it's going to get blown up within 2.5, 3 years because something else is going to happen and a whole nother list of topics is ready to be discussed.
Oh, for sure. I mean, there's no guarantee in any of this, and we still don't know how college football is essentially going to look, and so it's tough to kind of transition to that kind of stuff. So, last thing I want to get you out on is the NFL draft starts tonight. Who is your top quarterback? Do you think Shedeur Sanders can be successful in the league? Two different things.
Yeah, we spent a lot of time during the pre-draft process talking about how here locally, I mean in Austin, about how the quarterback draft class was not good this year. Who's the top quarterback? Yeah, it's probably Cam Ward. Cam Ward was terrific at Miami. You saw Cam Ward. You and I saw Cam Ward live at least once, maybe twice when he was at Washington State. I don't want to speak for you, but like I was not watching Cam Ward and thinking like he's the number one pick in the draft.
No, not at all.
So that's sort of where this quarterback class is.
To be fair, Jaden Daniels, when he was in the Pac-12, wasn't that either, right? It wasn't until he transferred
100%.
that he changed. And now you're seeing that translate. So maybe that's kind of the same arc, right?
100% fair, right? Cam Ward had more help, more pieces around him at Miami. You got a bit more of his skill set sort of coming out, and here we are. I personally don't think Shedeur Sanders I don't think he's a high first-round pick. I don't pretend to be like the superior judge of talent. I've always tried to avoid that. Like I'm not that guy, but like I'm not watching Shedeur Sanders like he's a franchise quarterback. That's going to be the interesting part of tonight. I mean, you see the mock drafts and they're mock drafts, right? But you see number 4, number 22 to the Giants at 3 potential. So, that's when there's a wide sort of avenue for a prospect, separated by 18, 20, 22 picks. That's always the more interesting guys, because if you do take him high, the intent is to have him play. If you're drafting him 3, 4, 5, somewhere really high, I just don't know that he's that guy.
Yeah, I agree. I'm really fascinated to see kind of where he lands. Not truly because I care, but more just kind of, regardless of who he is as a person. And I think sometimes he comes off as a very arrogant guy. I think he's not quite fully that. There can be times like that, but I think this is a guy that he gets in there, he fights hard. The fact that he had a terrible offensive line at Colorado for 2 years and he continued to take sacks and did what he did is impressive, right? But I think that changes drastically in the NFL, and I don't think just because you're Deion Sanders' son, and I know that he's kind of shaking off some of that kind of stuff, but just because you're Deion Sanders' son doesn't translate necessarily to the NFL, whether Deion believes that or not.
I do just want to say, just knowing that you are a Dallas Cowboys fan and me living here in Cowboys country, the fans hate the Cowboys here. The fans hate the Cowboys here. That's like I hate the Jets.
The Cowboys,
like,
or do they hate Jerry Jones?
They hate the Cowboys. They hate Jerry Jones. They hate all of it, dude.
I mean,
I'm
I do
serious.
too. We can both commiserate on how bad we hate our franchise. So.
Oh my God. Yeah, they don't like Jerry Jones. They think it's going to be a clown show. And it's been interesting living here amongst Cowboys fans because I get agita and stress over the Jets, and like these people get agita and stress over the Cowboys, so we can commiserate in our misery for our respective favorite teams. It's been fun.
What a dumpster fire it is. So, well, I appreciate you joining me as always. You know, hopefully we can get you on here a couple more times in the off season or something. But I know people know where to follow you. But where can they see what you're doing? Kind of where you're at and your hot takes on bagels online.
Yeah, no, I'm between gigs at the moment. At Joshua_Newman is still the Twitter handle. I'm still handing out bagel and coffee takes. DMs are open if you just want to goof around. So yeah, at Joshua_Newman on Twitter still.
Well, awesome. We appreciate it. And that's going to be our episode today. Hopefully you got something out of that. Hopefully we gave you something, whether that be tampering or Utah's move to a potential power two. We're just going to make up stuff. How about that? We're just going to do that.
It's April. What else are we doing? We're making up stuff. It's April.
That's what we love. So appreciate you listening. We'll catch you again next week. Thank you. Signing off.